Design shapes the way you live. I'm Nico, an interior design expert focused on the connection between home and well-being. Using science, design, and professional expertise, I'll help you shape a space that elevates your mindset and enhances your well-being. Let's create space for better living, starting now. If you're planning to update your home, pause for a minute. Before you buy the new sofa, before you choose the tile, before you repaint the walls or swap the lighting, you need to know this. Not every design decision creates the same level of impact. Today, we're talking about where to spend your money to elevate your home without renovating everything. We're going to cover the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom. And I have a little bonus insight at the end that might completely shift how you think about spending. Because here's what most people get wrong. They change a lot, but they don't change the right things. And that's why the space still feels fine, but not finished, updated, but not elevated, new, but not designed. At Pero, we talk about creating space for better living. And that means understanding that our homes are not just decorative. They actually influence our mood, our stress levels, our behavior, and even our physical health. So let's start with something important. I want to talk about a term you've probably heard before, and that's builder grade. It's also called builder basic, because I think it's important to paint a clear picture. Builder basic basically refers to inexpensive, mass-produced materials, which are lower quality, low-grade versions of what goes into a home when it's first built. So they're pre-selected, limited options, which are available in common sizes, and there's very little customization, if any. This saves time, and it saves money, and it allows developments to move quickly, which is great. But it also means there's very little personality. There's no soul to it. I was once hired to take sort of a builder grade home and personalize it. My role was to really bring in the soul of that space, tailoring it to the way my clients actually lived. I've also worked on commercial buildings where I watched so many concessions being made in real time, like details diluted and functions simplified and just the overall quality reduced. And I'll be honest, it really felt like I died a slow designer death some days, because when everything is more or less value engineered down to neutral and safe, something essential gets stripped out. And I have also lived in Builder Basic, our first home, which I did love because it was our first home. And I'm also grateful that I had the experience of that particular place because it taught me how lack of detail feels just in daily life. When everything is just evenly distributed and very neutral, nothing stands out. And when nothing stands out, a space feels very generic. It feels flat and incomplete. And our brains crave hierarchy. Charles Eames said, "The details are not the details, they make the design." And I believe that deeply. The best rooms create intentional reactions. They affect us emotionally. They affect our behavior. They affect us physically. I recently read an article that said our homes are active participants in well-being. And I believe that so much. Home is taste, so it's style, it's taste. Home is function, so it needs to support how we live. Home is safety, it's our haven. Home is connection. So that could be with guests, that could be with partners, that could be with ourselves. So when you look at your space and feel that urge for change, that's not superficial. That's your cue that you need to be connected to your environment. You need to be connected to your home aesthetically. Now let's talk about where that actually happens. The living room is one of the most used spaces in most homes, and it deserves intention. It deserves focus, and often it deserves a larger portion of your budget. And usually the anchor in that room is the sofa. Let me tell you about ours. The black sofa we bought for that builder grade home looked great in the beginning. This was years ago when we had bought that home, and we were so excited to make one of our big purchases, which was the sofa. And we went out to the store and we found this modern sectional. It was black, it was micro suede, it was affordable, and it fit the space. So it basically checked all of the boxes at that time. But within a short time, the cushions started collapsing. Like when we sat down, they didn't bounce back. You sort of just got lost in the cushions. When you stood up, you could see the imprint of where you were sitting. So, and then, at first that would kind of bounce back up slowly, but then over time that just stayed. Then the fabric began to fade in the areas that had sunlight. So that can happen with certain kinds of fabric, but this didn't even get a lot of sunlight. Like it didn't get a lot of direct sunlight. The orientation of our unit was so that we didn't get a lot of direct natural light, but the small amount we did get hit that side of the sofa and it faded out into this sort of bluey brown. Anyway, that sofa slowly made the entire room feel worn, even though nothing else had changed. And here's what that taught me. Foam density matters. Cushion construction matters, fabric quality matters, as does frame integrity. So how rigid and how good quality that frame is. And I learned this years later when I got into design, and I was able to take those experiences that I had and then understand even more when we were working on custom pieces. But, you feel these things daily. A high quality sofa will have things like kiln dried wood. So it'll have like a hardwood frame, high density foam. It'll have really tight tailoring and durable upholstery. If you can't buy new at like a good level, then I always say look for secondhand and reupholster it, because secondhand pieces, if they're old, things were made better and they were more sturdy. And you can often ask an upholsterer, they can tell you whether it's worth upholstering or not, whether the quality of the piece is worth reupholstering. I will warn you, if you haven't done it, that it's not inexpensive, but often it can cost much less than going out and buying a really good quality sofa. But I will say that if you do reupholster, make sure you protect the soul of the piece. I once reupholstered a chair that I loved, and I accidentally stripped away all of its character in the process. It went from storied to very generic. I tweaked the arm shape and I removed the skirt and the legs that I went for, because at the time what my budget was, I had a few options for the legs and I went for a more generic style for cost reasons. And when I got the chair, I loved it because of the process of customization and all of the things. The color was right. But I kind of deep down was like, oh, the soul is gone. What I fell in love with that chair initially, the scale and the curve and even the skirt, there were just details to it that made me drawn to it initially. And then I did strip it away. So be careful of that. Update carefully. Okay, now let's talk about art. Oversized art anchors a room instantly. It gives hierarchy. It sets the tone. It informs future decisions. You can find art online. You can visit local galleries and attend, art crawls. We have an amazing art crawl not too far from me. It's called the Cultural Crawl. And you go from gallery to gallery and you get to meet the artists. You get to see their current works and get a feel for different styles. And I love that because even though I've gone and not bought things, it allows me to just see all of the different styles of art, the different mediums, and see which ones I'm drawn to. So I'll often take pictures and come back and look at them and just sort of, decide which ones I really like and which ones I'm not as drawn to. And this process of buying art doesn't have to be rushed, right? You can save because art can be expensive. You can wait and you can let the right piece find you. Art is not a filler, it's a foundation. So it really does dictate what happens next in the room, which I love because it can be such an amazing jumping off point for other design decisions. It does carry that presence, that weight, and it gives you that sense that the space has been curated, and there's something for curating and being very purposeful in design that's felt. And just on a side note, and this one is subtle but powerful, designate your living room. I always say designating spaces is so important. And what I mean is to do things like remove certain technology, right? So limit screens in certain areas to really clarify the purpose of the room. If you do that, you're kind of making space for other things to happen. You make it a place for reading, for music, for conversation, for art. When a room has a defined purpose, again, it adds to that intentionality. That shift costs nothing, but it really can change everything. So the kitchen is where design meets repetition. You use it every day. So this is where friction can accumulate. So let's talk about the sink for starters. The sink is actually very personal. I know some people might think, oh, but it's just a sink, like a sink is a sink. But if you're someone who rinses dishes and leaves them before loading the dishwasher, you may need a double bowl. So one side can hold dishes and the other stays usable. If you cook large meals and wash big pots, a single oversized basin may serve you better. The wrong sink creates micro stress. And yeah, like I said, you may think, well, a sink is a sink. But when we actually look at the different types of sinks available, you have a top mount sink, you have an under mount sink, you have a double basin sink, and those basins can be different sizes. You have a single basin sink, you have an integrated sink, you have a farmhouse sink with an apron front, and those ones come in all sorts of styles. Some of them are so beautiful. You have a drain board sink. You have a low divider double sink. So that means like the little partition in the middle between the two sinks is actually quite a bit lower. You have little prep sinks that you can add to places like islands and whatnot. You also have corner sinks. There's a lot of different types, and the look of them can change the look of your kitchen, and they all kind of need to be factored in. There's sinks that have really sharp edges. So, and that when I'm talking about an edge, I mean where the bottom of the sink meets the side. There's a radius there, and those radiuses can be, curved, or they can be quite sharp. And if they're not curved, some people are bothered because they're a little harder to clean. And even though a sink isn't necessarily the most visually impactful part of a kitchen, they are very functionally impactful. They can be beautiful, of course, but day in and day out, it's the function of a sink that needs to match how we use it. Countertops are also one of the largest surfaces in the kitchen. So you've got to consider, the countertop is one of the best places to add impact, whether you choose to, depending on the budget, put that impact on, say, an island, splurge a little bit on the island versus the perimeter countertop. So do a different countertop on your island than on the rest. But there's other things to factor in. And this is where countertops can get fun, right? You think, countertop in terms of the edge and the thickness and all of those things. But that's really where you can interject some of that detail. Edge profiles are a perfect place to do this. Also the thickness of the countertop. This is where you can really impact the overall style of the room. So next, we're going to talk about the bedroom. Many guests never see your primary bedroom. It's just one of those rooms that we can really personalize, and we can think about the impact that it has on the people that use the space. You don't have to worry about making sure there's enough seats for guests when they come, or how this room, if it's open plan, how the room works with the other adjacent rooms. The primary bedroom can really be its own place place that addresses very few people's needs. So that makes it even more important because this room isn't about impressing people. It's about how you feel when you close the door. And the element that most defines that feeling and gives that impact is the headboard. The headboard really sets the tone for the entire room. If it's tufted, it leans to a more traditional look. And if it's sleek and minimal, it leans to more contemporary. If it's wood grain with texture, it can feel very natural and organic. And if it's upholstered and soft, it immediately adds that comfort and warmth. And your fabric choice, if it's worn, if it's nubbly, if it's a linen, if it's a velvet, like all of these choices dictate what style it is and what feel the room will have. The style you choose really tells the room how to behave. Okay, so how do you choose the right headboard? Well, you want to start with how you use your bed, right? If you sit up and read at night, then height matters. You want to make sure that it supports your back. You want to make sure that it's tall enough to feel substantial behind your pillows. If it's too low, it will visually disappear and it could sort of underperform in the space. Super low headboards have a different feel to them. They have a different presence to them. So you want to factor that in with how you need it to be used. If comfort matters, then upholstery is often the best choice versus doing like a wood. If you want sort of architectural presence, then things like wood or paneled styles can add to that beautifully. But let's talk about the placement of the headboard, because if you have a window in your bedroom, I know people sort of struggle with this. They think, well, this wall might be the ideal wall for the headboard, but there's a window there. And this is something that you can still put a headboard in front of. If you have the space, though, you could consider kind of pulling the bed forward and just allowing it to kind of float in the room rather than pushing it right tight to the wall. And that sort of small shift can kind of create breathing room, and it feels very intentional. It's kind of like a relaxed way to do it. But you need the space in order for that to work. If that window is your only light source, so it's your only source of natural light, then you want to be thoughtful about the headboard style. Because obviously a fully solid, heavy headboard could block that natural light and make the room feel darker. But if that's not your only natural light source, then you could go with a heavier weighted headboard and then in front of the window. And in that case, but if it's not your only light source, in this case, you may want something with more of an open back that's maybe even a lower profile, or it's slatted, or it's just, a wrought iron. So it's visually lighter and the light can pass through. And this is also where curtains can really help transform that, because when you frame a headboard with curtains, it immediately elevates a bedroom. They add, they lift the eye up, they add vertically, and they create just that visual weight. They also add that subtle kind of custom layer that makes a room feel really complete and intentional. And if you do things like mount your curtain rods higher than the window frame, and let that fabric extend beyond the window width, then, you allow them to frame the entire bed wall, right? Drapery plus a strong headboard is kind of a designer move, right? Drapery plus a headboard is kind of a designer move. It softens, it anchors, it customizes. Okay, so now let's talk about lighting in the bedroom. There are incredible, affordable lighting options. I mentioned it when we were talking about the kitchen, but you just may need to search longer. And I'll say that again because it just might take more time to find the right one at the affordable price. Okay. So if you want to elevate the look further, look at lighting designers, right? Even upgrade a lampshade. This is such a subtle, not even subtle. It doesn't have to be subtle, I shouldn't say, because you can get really, really cool lampshades with patterns and texture and color. But just upgrading that and customizing that a little bit can really shift the entire feel of a fixture. And an oversized ceiling fixture, this is an amazing detail in a space. This does not go unnoticed. It establishes scale. It finishes the room. It anchors the room. And now I just want to mention something that can apply to any room in the house, but I feel like this is important to say. It's not so much where you're going to see it as much, but you'll definitely feel it. And this is with paint. And I want to specifically talk about surface prep because paint really does reveal imperfections. And so if walls aren't patched properly or sanded smooth or even skim coated if necessary, then light and certain colors of paint will really expose that imperfection. Years ago, I worked with a client who chose a lower level of finish. And it was a big process, right? We were looking at the different options, the different level of finishes. And just if you're not familiar with that, basically a painter can come in and they can provide different levels of finishes. So it's like, do you want me to go through and patch every single hole? Do you want me to prepare the surface prior to paint? And there's different ways of doing that. So, and of course, with that comes different price points. And so it typically goes to, well, what's the goal here? If the paint is, say, like a high gloss, then you need to have a certain level of finish because everything is going to be seen in that case. Whereas if you don't, you can kind of pick and choose based on price, what level of repair to the existing walls that you want. So in this case, we'd had that conversation with the client. She was very much aware of the different levels and what she would get from each one. But in her case, she wanted to, she was being mindful of her budget. And so she decided to go with the lesser level. And she made that decision knowingly. And in most rooms, it turned out fine. But in a couple rooms where the light hit at an angle, every flaw was visible. And she sort of was kicking herself after because she's like, oh, I should have gone with it. So that's just something I want to share, because when you're paying the money to have a space painted and you have that option, really understand that you can see that the surface quality determines whether a room feels really polished or just unfinished. You'd hate to go through the process of having it painted and paying a professional to do it, and then in the end you're like, oh, it doesn't feel as finished as what I was hoping. And that really does impact how you feel in the space. And when we talk about elevating a room and a bedroom, it's not just about the objects. It's about the backdrop that's supporting them. And that's the case for any room really with paint. But in particular with the bedroom, I would say, focus on the headboard, think about adding curtains, lighting, and make sure that surface finish is good. These are the layers that move a bedroom from simply functional to feeling that fully designed feel. So bathrooms are one of the rooms that can go sort of builder basic quite quickly. They are full of hard surfaces, standard fixtures, and really often predictable layouts. And when everything is standard, things can feel flat. So here's how I think about spending in a bathroom. You don't have to upgrade everything. You upgrade what the eye lands on and what the body interacts with. Okay, so let's start with the shower. If your budget is tight, don't try to make every tile special. Choose a more cost-effective floor tile because there's a lot of really great options for large format tiles. that are great price points. Then invest in the shower walls so you can up the budget a little on the shower walls. That vertical surface is really what you see, and it reflects light and it sets the tone for the room. So a beautiful, well-laid shower tile instantly elevates the space, even if the floor is simple, okay? Now, think about the shower experience itself. An oversized shower head changes everything, right? The scale, the water distribution, the feeling when you're in the shower, even just looking into the shower. This is where experience lives. Plumbing trim matters too, right? When handles in that shower feel substantial, it registers. You touch these elements daily, and if there's that weight to them, then it's something to invest in. Now let's talk about cabinetry, because this one is one of the most overlooked elevation opportunities, really. Like a flat slab vanity with no detail will really read builder grade very quickly, and it will also just leave you feeling underwhelmed. So introduce detail where you can, right? You can do this with furniture legs. You can have a curved apron, even converting a vintage furniture piece into a vanity. It just adds that level of intention. It feels layered. It warms up the space, especially if it's a wood. And suddenly the bathroom feels designed. I love seeing interesting vanities because this is an opportunity to add that level of detail in an often very hard surfaced space. And then the other thing is the countertops in bathrooms. They matter as well. A solid surface with some weight, right? Like a stone, something with depth adds that permanence. But again, like if you're looking to where in the room, if you're going to choose between countertop or you're going to choose between cabinetry, I would say, and again, you have to factor in your tile scheme, right? But if you can go with a more simplistic countertop and really get some great detail in that vanity, that's often where you see where your money went, right? So a framed mirror also, instead of just a flat plate mirror, immediately adds that detail. And lighting is critical in bathrooms, and you want to play with layering where you can. So overhead lighting alone will just kind of flatten everything, and it's not adequate lighting really for a bathroom. So, to layer in sconces and add that warmth and position light at face level as well when possible, especially if you do your makeup in the bathroom, that's really important. Something that I want to mention is if you do not take baths, don't install a freestanding tub just because you feel you need to have it. Often people, especially in a master bath, will think that they need to have this big soaker tub, even if they don't use it. So if it's not something you use, don't feel like you need it, because you can take that part of the budget and move it into your shower tile or your vanity. You can use that square footage. You can move that square footage into your shower, so you get an extra large shower. But yeah, I mean, freestanding baths or really beautiful bathtubs, they're not inexpensive. So if you don't use it, don't feel like you need to have it. Banding the shower and adding a bench and upgrading the tile and investing in the experience that you actually use, right? You want to design for how you live, and that's how you're going to have the most impact on your well-being. Bathrooms are very hard surface heavy, as I mentioned. So ask yourself, where can I soften this? And that might be through better lighting. That could be through warmer finishes, that cabinet detail, and textile layering. It's about creating a space that feels considered. So when you walk into it, it should feel designed. It should feel like someone made decisions. And that's the difference between builder and intentional. That's where you're going to get the biggest impact. So really, a bathroom, it's about creating a space that feels considered. You want it to feel like you made some very intentional decisions in there, and that there's enough detail. And that's really the difference between it feeling basic, it feeling blah versus having that impact that you're after. Before we close, here's the final piece that ties everything together. Impact doesn't come from how much you spend. It comes from where you spend and how well it's executed. You can invest in the right anchor pieces, but if the workmanship is rushed and the details are sloppy or the finish is compromised, the impact weakens. On the other hand, even simple materials, when installed beautifully, carry presence. So impact really lives in the weight of a faucet handle, the density of a sofa cushion, the height of a headboard, the precision of tile lines, the smoothness of a painted wall. Execution protects impact. So when you're allocating your budget, don't just think about what you're buying, think about how it will land in the space. So let's summarize this clearly. If you want the biggest impact in your home, spend it on things that anchor the room, the pieces that visually lead the room, like your sofa, your headboard, your shower wall. Spend where you interact daily. If you touch it every day, it deserves attention. Concentrate your budget. Don't spread it thin across 5 different rooms. Focus on the spaces you live in the most. A budget goes a lot further when you're focusing on fewer rooms. So think about the rooms that you live in the most and tackle those. Concentrate your budget there. Choose quality and tactile elements because your body feels craftsmanship. Even if you don't always consciously notice it, it's very felt in a space. Create hierarchy. Not everything needs to be upgraded, okay? But some things need to carry that weight. So just decide on the few things in the room that you want to upgrade and you want to spend the money on. Not everything needs it, okay? Even designers make concessions, okay? That's how you move a space from fine to intentional, from updated to impactful. Don't need to renovate everything. You need to change the right things. If this episode helped you think differently about your next design decision, I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me over at yourparo.com. That's yourparo.com. yourparo.com. There you'll find my free design guides, past episodes, and details about the Create Space course, where we go deeper into designing homes with intention and impact. You can also find me on Instagram, my personal Instagram, bynico.space. Send me a message and tell me where you're choosing to invest next. Because when you spend intentionally, you don't just change a room, you change how that room works for you. And that's the biggest impact of all. I'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the support the show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.